Hi, everyone. I'm told that there are no atheists in foxholes, but do they show up to big celebratory moments like Flag Day or the 4th of July? I'm asking because there seem to be a few similarities between the two events. Foxholes tend to be filled with military members. So are the main marches and parades on Flag Day and the 4th of July. Both seem to involve lots of fireworks. But there's one commonality that seems overarching and perhaps most devastating to the non atheists in foxholes. I'm talking about the noise. I'm also wondering if the same devastation or fear that drives the atheism out of the soldier in the foxhole would drive it out of him in a parade. Truthfully, the issue is on my mind as we approach the incredibly diverse Parshas Behaalosecha this week. The Parsha is jam-packed with highs and eventually lows of the Jewish nation's continued trip towards Eretz Yisrael. But in the middle of the Parsha, Moshe is commanded to make two special silver trumpets for himself. He's told that he's to make each one from a single solid piece of silver. The purpose of these trumpets, the Torah tells us, "V'hayu lecha lemikra ha'edah, v'lemasa es hamachanos," so that it will be there for you to call the Edah together, the congregation, and to let the camp know that they are going to travel. Now, later we learn that the same trumpets, the chatzotros, would be sounded in the times of challenge and war, when the people would be under attack. And the sounding of the trumpets would be there to call the people to war and ultimately to Hashem and victory. And additionally, the trumpets would be utilized on Rosh Chodesh and other holidays, Uviyom Simchaschem, Uvemoadechem, Uverashei Chadshechem, to be sounded at times of triumph. It seems odd that the same sounds and to sound the same trumpets at the moments of war, but also at joy. That's like comparing the noise of war in foxholes to the sounds of joy on a July 4th evening. It seems odd. Why are these disparate, seemingly opposite times of emotional experience connected with the use of the same instrument, the chatzotros? And while we're at it, why do they need to be made from a single piece of silver? Only the menorah and the kruvim share that requirement with the chatzotros. And while those Mishkan Mikdash utensils have lofty intentions, why is the chatzotros included with them in this miksha, this single unit requirement? And while we're figuring out the makeup and use of the chatzotros, perhaps we can also figure out the redundancy of its first use. Calling the congregation Eda and the Machana camp together is essentially the same thing. So why the repeat of the Eda and the Machaneh? Perhaps we might come to an understanding of the role of the chatzotros if we understood their halachic purpose. The Rambam connects the mitzvah of making and blowing the chatzotros to a call for tshuva when things are going badly. But as the Rambam goes further, he adds another point. Aval, he says, however, im lo yizaku v'lo yariu, if the people don't cry out and blow the chatzotros, ela yomru davar zeh mimena ka'olam ira lanu, instead they choose to say that the tragedies and calamities are just the way of the world, v'tzarazu nikres nikris, and the troubles that we have are just happenstance, harezu derech achzarios. This is considered a cruel trait. V'goremes lahem lidabik b'maseim harayim. It causes people to stick to their evil ways. I get the idea of it being foolish not to respond to the sound of a crisis. I might even call it reckless and dangerous. But why does the Rambam use the word achzarios, or cruelty over here? Why is it cruel not to blow chatzotros? Rav Nosson Sherman of Art Scroll fame compared this matter to an intersection in one's neighborhood where accidents are constantly occurring. It's just a terrible corner. Again and again, another accident, another person killed. But when the neighbors have had enough, someone approached the government and petitioned that they do something about the intersection. Put up a stop sign, he said. Put up a red light. Do something. There's carnage going on out there. And the local alderman responded, no, our department has determined that there's no need for a stop sign. Rabbi Sherman added that bureaucrat is cruel because he can't stop the carnage. He can stop the accidents. He's just not willing to do anything. It's simple cruelty to preside over carnage and do nothing when it's within your power to stop the carnage. And the same is true when it comes to the Chatzotzros. We need to realize that when there is a need to sound an alarm, it's cruel not to listen to it. Alarms are reminders that when bad things occur, it's a time to ask Hashem, what does He want from us to know about the situation? And the Rambam is reminding us that we can't ignore the threat that caused the sounding of the alarm. But at the same time, we ought not ignore the cause of the threat. When we're distanced from Hashem and His Torah, we need to hear the message of distance, and we need to do something about it. So many times when we see things go wrong in our communities, we have a tendency to react by saying, well, that's just the way it is. That's cruel. It's not the reaction that the Torah expects from us. The Torah wants us to put up a stop sign, to stop and think and react and try to improve. And a community that fails to react is as bad as the bureaucrat who fails to put up the stop sign on the carnage-prone intersection. Our avos taught us to handle difficulties in a totally different way. When facing the threat of Esav's coming with 400 men to annihilate him and his family, Yaakov Avinu doesn't just prepare for war and make peace overtures, he davens to Hashem. He recognizes the immediate threat, Esav, but also the message behind the threat, stay closer to Hashem. And he works on strengthening both aspects of the message. Blow the chatzotzos and come closer to Hashem. With that in mind, we can also understand why we also blow chatzotzos at the time of joy. Times of joy and victory are no less a time to become close to Hashem. In fact, in the term for Yamim Tovim, Moed or Moadechem comes from the word vad or meeting, as our Yamim Tovim are primarily about being times to rendezvous with Hashem. These are times of joy, yes, but also times of connection. We certainly cannot forget the Chatzotzos then. Blowing Chatzotzos at the time of challenge and at the time of triumph may seem contrary times, but they're really unified in message. There are no atheists who blow or properly listen to the noise of the Chatzotzros. You hear the sound and you join together with Hashem. When we join with Hashem, it's not just the joining of the individual with his God that is essential for the message of Chatzotzros. If it were, each of us would just have a Chatzotzra of our own. But the Chatzotzrot blow for a full nation, trying to unite us in a return to Hashem. In a famous lecture of Soloveitchik identified the Chatzotzros as bringing a message to a nation that is described as two camps, the Machaneh and the Eidah. A Machaneh, Rav Soloveitchik suggested, is a group that unites based on a common thread or a shared history. It's a defensive alliance. An Eidah, however, is supposed to be united and working on a better future based on vision. He identified the duality as one of fate versus faith. As he explained, sometimes the Chatzotzros clarion call speaks to our sense of faith. We are, after all, God's people, His emissaries and ambassadors, charged with making His presence real in the world by healing deeds and holy lives. But at other times, the trumpet that sounds and summons us is the call of fate. It's Jewish lives, the endangered in Israel, or in Galus in the diaspora, by unremitting hostility of those who call themselves children of Abraham, yet claim that they, not we, are his true heirs. Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs added that whichever sound the Chatzotzros make, the one of faith or fate, they call on the duality that makes Jews and Judaism inseparable. No matter the deep the divisions between us, we're still one family in Machaneh and Eidah, in faith and in faith. And maybe that's why the Chatzotzros are one of the three Mishkan tools that need to be mikshah, created from one piece. While the Reish Rav Aaron Levin noted that the single solid piece of silver provides the message that a leader blowing the Chatzotzros may need to be tough, perhaps I might suggest that the message of one solid piece is also a reminder of where that toughness comes from. It comes from the single, solid, united toughness of a nation born of both faith and fate. Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky added that perhaps this is why each generation needs its own Chatzotzros, because the solid message that we rally around towards Hashem today is distinct from the call of yesterday. The call of the Chatzot United message needs to be broken down into the language that the people can hear and rally around. The foxhole and the festival, the panic and the parade, the same trumpet. What unites them is not just the sound, but the response. You see, Chatzot still blow today, perhaps not with silver, but with crises, with headlines, with celebrations, and with calls for introspection. The only question that remains is, will we answer the call? Will we recognize the events in our lives and the ones we hear about, joyful or painful, are signals for reconnection, for solidarity, for deepening our relationship with Hashem and with one another? To ignore the sound is to be cruel, but to respond as an individual and as a nation is the ultimate act of Rahmanas, of compassion, of tshuva. Let us each be the Jew who hears the noise. And when we hear the noise, we are the ones who step forward. Wishing you and yours a Shabbat Shalom and a Shabbat Shalom to